So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ward Tisdale, who is Director of Community Affairs at AMD. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you all for being here. I guess I'm kind of disclosed here. So welcome. This, as Michelle mentioned, this is our 5th year sponsoring Games for Change. We launched our program, AMD Changing the Game, here 4 years ago. It's been a great experience. Each year we kind of tweak things a little bit. This year we're going to be focusing on tools that will enable you to create video games and to teach video game design to your students. And show of hands, how many teachers do we have here? Excellent. You are the primary audience. So again, AMD Changing the Game is a program we launched 4 years ago. It's about, in a nutshell, giving kids opportunities to create video games. And you're going to hear today why that's important. For us, as a high-tech company, we need kids and youth around the world that are steeped in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And we think teaching kids how to create games is a good first step to getting on that path. We have reached about 75,000 kids in the last 4 years around the world with video game opportunities in 6 countries. We have a goal by 2020 to reach 1 million youth. So working with great partners that you see here and also in the room, we intend to do that. So we're pretty excited about that. So today what we're going to do is, for this panel, to kind of whet your appetite, kind of lay some context for why we're teaching the workshop today. We're going to talk about the different tools that are available for youth to learn how to create games. So my panel here is Dan Rousey with the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, Julie Shannan with Girlstart, Scott Peterman with Parsons and New School for Design, and Brian Alspach with Eline Media and the Gamestar Mechanic tool. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and launch into the panel and ask a few questions. Is this still? Yeah. So to get started, I'm going to just lay it out for the panel. Why is game design important? Why should kids even care about designing games? What are the benefits? And I'm just going to go down the line here and start with you, Dan, to kind of give your take on that issue.
Well, first of all, we know that kids are into video games. And so it really is for us a hook to get kids into the tech center to not just use technology, but really work with technology. We have about 3,100 of our almost 4,000 clubs offer some technology computers to kids. And with our club tech programs, we provide curriculum that our clubs can use to teach different technology skills. And what we're hearing from our pilot sites, the sites that we actually support, that AMD supports to use the program, that it's one of the most popular things that kids can do and to get them into the tech center to actually work with technology. So for us, it's really about a way of exciting that desire to do something more than just sit and surf the web and just to play video games.
So why game development? Well, 95% of kids are using technology, and only a small fraction actually know how to use actually know how to create the technology that makes that work. So game development opens up their eyes to how computers are made, how they're programmed, why, essentially problem solving for their future jobs. And, as far as the game development job workforce, there are, an estimated, millions of jobs that's where the workforce is growing. So why not prepare our youth, especially girls at a younger age, to plan for a career in technology?
Obviously, totally agree with both of these points. I think beyond it, one thing that I've felt is that STEM skills should be a skill set, not subject area. And games are really interesting because they require systems thinking, and they require thinking about things as an engineer, but they also require art. They also require writing. They need good stories and good characters to be compelling. So it takes these systemic skills that students are learning through these STEM initiatives, but it really applies them across the board, to thinking about the world in general.
It's such a great point. And another aspect of it is we've all, I'm sure at some point in our education, had the experience had the experience of sitting through a class or a subject that we didn't like or we weren't into. Well, the reality is 97% of youth in America play games. And we at E-Line, we really believe that if you take something that is of natural interest or natural passion for kids, like game design, and you connect that interest with all the skills that you can develop, whether they're STEM skills, whether they're creative skills, whether they're collaborative skills, whether they're problem-solving skills, you can do something really powerful. And instead of having to spend your time motivating someone, you can build on that natural motivation and move forward.
A late entry here, Alex Gomez from Microsoft. We're so happy Alex could make it. His plane was delayed this morning. So Alex, the question really is, why is game design important for youth?
Well, I've been a software engineer, a faculty member at Michigan State University, and a game designer for the last 20 odd years. And in all those roles, I have found that some of the fundamental skills that are developed during game design, which a lot of the panelists are talking about, things like problem solving, systems thinking, critical thinking, are fundamental not only to the STEM disciplines, but really to anything, any kind of job in the knowledge, in the knowledge economy. Whether you're going to be a marketing analyst, whether you're going to be a financial analyst, whether you're going to be an engineer or a scientist, at the end of the day, it's about being able to use complex information, complex data to understand complex systems, right? To make connections between pieces of data that you have in front of you and to be able to understand them or represent them in different ways. The beauty of game design, in my mind, is that, for the last 10 years or so, a lot of faculty members have been talking about games as a form of literacy, right? Games as something that players learn to read and write, patterns of connections between elements that players learn to understand. So if I talk about a platformer or I talk about first-person shooter, a gamer or a young guy or girl who's played a lot of games will be able to immediately understand how the pieces of the puzzle would fit together in creating those things or in understanding those things. With a game design, the extra or the added value is that it's literally the complete literacy. It's the ability to actually use those patterns to write and to express yourself. And in that process, really powerful things happen, particularly understanding the world in a different way. Rather than just reading about science or reading about complex systems in a book, you actually get to construct those complex systems and to actually display your own understanding of them, which has very powerful implications not only for children's learning, but also for how we assess that learning. In a time when we're so focused on assessing things through standardized tests, game design really brings to the table something new, a completely different way of thinking about what it means to learn and what it means to know.
So in theory, I think our panel agrees that game design has positive benefits for youth. I'd like to ask you now about some success stories that some experiences that you've had with youth creating games. I know one of our partners, the Boys and Girls Clubs, there was a young man right outside of Washington, D.C., who wanted to drive an ice cream truck, was his goal in life. And which is nothing wrong with that. I love ice cream. It's probably a good job to have. But he went through the game tech program, and then he suddenly he wanted to be a game developer. So the light bulb went off. So just curious about our panel, some success stories you've had. And I didn't really give you a chance to talk a little bit about your program in general. So if you want to talk a little bit more about game tech, a little more about Girlstart, that'd be great. So I'll go back to you, Dan.
Well, game tech, is a program that teaches first the iterative game design process and then creating games. And we use the Scratch programming language for a number of different reasons. And in 2011, we just got our 2011 numbers in. We had a little over 20,000 kids go through that program at about a little over 350 of our sites. And at our implementation sites, the ones we support to run the program, we ask for success stories. And we get back stories like this particular kid who's down in Austin, who was, shall we say, a little bit of a hellion in the club. But once he got into game design, he actually ended up teaching the course to the other club members there because he got into it so much and it was something that he really latched onto. We have another story we got from our club in, I believe it was the Silicon Valley Club, about somebody who didn't realize, one of our kids didn't realize there were careers you could do this in and enjoyed it so much, they're going to start investigating careers. So, you know, I could go on and on with stories of individual kids, but I think it's the overall thing, as I said earlier, is that, you know, it's something that attracts kids and gets them to start thinking that I can do stuff with technology more than just sit in front of it and watch it.
That's cool. Girlstart is the only nonprofit in America that is dedicated to STEM education for girls. And we also just had a recent study from Tisdale that indicated we are the most robust after-school program in the nation for girls in STEM education. So we reach about 15,000 girls a year with STEM education, and my job, it doesn't feel like a job a lot of times, is to find new tools to engage girls in STEM, and particularly technology. And gosh, back in the day when I was in college and someone asked me to get on the World Wide Web, and I was like, no, that's okay. I don't think I want to be doing that. Things have changed a lot. Now kids grow up, and that's kind of, you know, what their first touch with technology is usually a mobile device or something. So, yeah, and ours, back in the day, you know, you had to carry it in a bag. But anyway, long story short, girls obviously are not attracted to STEM. In fact, it's about 1 out of every 5 girls are going to get a computer science degree. And so if you look at this panel, it's about 1 out of every 5. And I want you to remember that. And so we're changing the game as far as that goes, and thank you, AMD, for helping us do that. But gosh, there's one particular girl, her name is Audrey. She is right now currently double major, but she's computer science and mechanical engineering. And she started out as Girlstart as a girl that was interested in art. And we were doing video game development in Python, and it's not something that I love doing, but it was, you know, definitely a challenge. And Audrey learned how to make her own video game, and not only did she learn how to program her game, she made all of the artwork for her game. And so she came out of Girlstart realizing as a senior she could either go to art school, which is great, or she could learn how to program and be the artist that she hires. And so she was able to leave Girlstart with a clear direction and a skill set, and also the confidence, which a lot of times girls don't have the confidence to even try it. And so she left not only with all of that, but now she's her own, kind of making her own ticket, and she's interning at HP right now in Dallas. So she's kind of got a full ride with whatever she wants to do.
Awesome. At Parsons, we have obviously many programs around kind of game design and education. The one we've been working with AMD on is a program called Activate Games, which is about not just making games, but making games about social issues, the environment, social justice, and really helping kids understand these big, wicked problems that are going to be their generation's, you know, burden to bear in a broad sense and as a system and as something that has inputs and outputs. In terms of wins, obviously there's many great student stories to tell. We've had a lot of wins with teachers, which I think has been really nice, is that there are lots of computers in classrooms right now, and a lot of them are just sitting there because they're in classrooms where it's kind of like, but we've got to focus on regents, we've got to focus on, you know, the core skills, and what we've been really excited to do is show them that, well, let's make a game about certain regents, you know, subjects. We can make games about literally anything, and it's something that teachers can go back to their principals with something that took 2 days to make and is very impressive and works, and the principal sits down and, you know, plays it on his iPad or plays it on his PC, and it's like, okay, like we see real results here. So we've had some really interesting success stories of teachers who are struggling to integrate technology even into their math and science classes, and that this was okay, the computer doesn't just have to sit there. It can be a real core teaching tool in addition to just something where kids go and do research or, you know, submit their homework or things like that.
very interested in the issue of young women and being engaged in STEM through game design. One of the initiatives that E-Line does in partnership with AMD as one of our wonderful founding sponsors, we run a series of youth game design challenges because we think competitions and challenges are a great way to engage youth in game design. One of those is called the National STEM Video Game Challenge. The competition's been running for 2 years. We just wrapped up our second competition cycle. And we've had over 4,000 entries from kids in the 2 years. Last year, in the first year, a third of our winners were young women. And one of the things I get to do is go around to their schools, the winners' schools, and present them with their awards, and they get recognized in front of their classmates, and it's really cool. Well, I did this last year for a young lady who won from the suburbs of New York here. And she was, very polite, but you could tell she was a little bit reserved about it. And when I asked her, she said, that she was actually a bit embarrassed to be recognized, privately in front of her classmates for a STEM-related thing. And I thought it was interesting. Well, fast forward to our second year of the competition. This year, another one of our sponsors, PBS, sponsored a design stream in the competition that was all about making early learning games, middle and high school kids designing games for K through second grade students. So the judging process came back, and of course it's blind judging, and when we took the judges' results, and we matched them up with who had entered them, we said, wait a minute, this can't be right, because both of our winning teams appear to be from the same classroom. And it turned out they were 2 all-girl teams from the classroom of one incredible teacher from the Stort Country Day School in Princeton, New Jersey. It was very interesting. We got to meet the young ladies on those teams. One of them spoke very eloquently about never having been interested in STEM, but when she had this opportunity to design a game and her teacher sort of prompted her to do it, she got to see some of the concepts. She got to see how programming worked. And now that actually has motivated her, and as she moves from 8th to 9th grade next year, she's planning on taking some computer science courses.
In the years that I've been doing this, I've actually found some of the most amazing things that happen around game design happen with the shift in the relationships that children or youth in their classrooms have with their classmates the moment that game design becomes a central part of the equation in the classroom culture. 2 years ago at this conference, Microsoft announced the release of a tool called Microsoft Code, a 3D environment that allows kids to create their own games and look at them all the way from the artistic side if they want, to come and draw the world, paint the world, tell a story, all the way down to the actual programming of the characters that they create. And we designed it in a way that would essentially be super accessible to kids. The success stories that we've had with it have been amazing. Particularly, I remember 2 stories. One of them, once a year we run this event called the Kodu Cup. And the Kodu Cup is essentially an event where we invite kids to create their own games and create games about grand challenges that the world is facing. One of our winners, Hannah Wyman, was an 11-year-old from Massachusetts, and he created a game based on problems that she was observing in her own town. So she came from a town that was historically the home of a lot of factories and a lot of pollution. And a lot of work had been done to clean this town over the years and to clean the river that ran through it. And she used that experience to actually create a game that would teach other people how to improve the air quality and the life quality in their towns by basically fostering action among the population. Well, Hannah ended up participating in last February at the second White House Science Fair. So she was one of the winners and the youngest participant in the White House Science Fair since the time it was instituted. But the other component that is really exciting to us with this is the work that we're doing with AMD Foundation right now around Kodu and engaging teachers. So the second story that I have with this happens with teachers in after-school clubs. We, back when I was a faculty member at Michigan State University, we used to run after-school clubs with Kodu. And one of the after-school clubs that we experimented with was in Detroit, in the inner city of Detroit. For those of you who have been in Detroit, it is probably the canary in the coal mine to what is happening to all our school districts today. Essentially, students not attending school, students abandoning school by the hordes, tons of empty classrooms, having to figure out how to deal with the problem of infrastructure and a school system that is not prepared for the 21st century. We decided to introduce Kodu with a game design curriculum into these after-school clubs on Saturdays. And we were wondering if kids were even going to attend. So we made a plan, and we had budget to run these camps for 10 Sundays, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., running it with at-risk kids, 20 at-risk kids, boys and girls, came to the classroom. I thought they were going to last a week. They lasted 40 weeks. So we planned for 10, they lasted 40. The moment that they got engaged with actually creating and expressing themselves was an incredibly powerful moment. In particular, to see the kids that were the least engaged all of a sudden gain a symbol of status because they were using games or because they were good at creating their own games and expressing themselves, completely transformed how they thought of themselves as students. This curriculum and a lot of this work has become something really, really exciting for us at Microsoft, because now we're using it on an initiative with AMD Foundation with Game Tech. Last week we announced a set of tools for teachers called Studio K that will allow teachers to pick up Kodu, use it in their classrooms, but more importantly, we're going to be experimenting and understanding how teachers can use the assessment of game design around things like systems thinking, critical thinking, and problem solving to actually use that information in their classrooms in other courses.
Thanks, Alex. Those are all great stories. It's always good to hear about the individual instances where sort of the light bulb goes off. Ask one more question, then I'm going to invite the audience to participate. But say I'm a teacher, not real technical. I'm interested in teaching game design, but a little intimidated. What's out there to remove that intimidation and make me feel comfortable that this is something I can do in the classroom? And I'm going to just throw it up. Yeah, you're going to put that slide up? Yeah, thanks. So anyone can kind of take that, or I'm not going to go in any order, but any takers?
I'll start since you're getting that video up or whatever. Girlstart uses a variety of tools. I'm always looking for new and interesting ways to engage girls. So if you have a tool, I'd love to hear about it. And then you can tweet it out to @Girlstart. And one we've used lately is Agent Sheets. And it is out of the University of Colorado at Boulder. And Agent Sheets is one of it's by platform, so you can use it on PC or Mac. And it's the reason I love this tool for girls is because girls can personalize, and personalization and creativity is something we see with boys and girls, but especially with girls, they really have ownership if it's their own artwork, and they're able to spend time creating that. So check it out. Agent Sheets is pretty easy to find if you Google it, and Girlstart has some tutorials. One of the things that we do is, and we've also used Gamestar Mechanic, and we were involved in their pilot stage as well. But we're shocked that kids don't really see gender biases as much as adults do in games. And something that, I have my own gender biases, but, boys and girls want to, shoot and, defend and mutilate things just as much as boys do. So just because there are those things in games, actually they're learning how that works and the coding behind it. So anyway, yeah.
I think, especially for teachers who may be new to game design, I think one point that I like to make is that a lot of people who are new to the space will equate game design with programming. And I think that that's not necessarily a conclusion I would draw. Game design and the discipline of learning how a game system works together, putting together an experience that is fun and challenging for the user, meets your design goals, meets your aesthetic goals, is a broader one than just programming. And in fact, on most professional game design teams, beyond just one or two individuals working on an app in their basement, you would typically find those roles divided. And so one of the things we do at Eline is we have a product called Gamestar Mechanic. It is an entry-level game design tool kind of optimized for middle school age students. Those of you who want to hang around, we're doing a workshop after this session using it. And the focus there is really starting with connecting young people with the interest in game design, teaching them how game systems work. And so the slide that you see up there is one that we use quite frequently to talk about if you begin sort of early on in your learning experience, wonderful tools like Gamestar, Kodu, that can really agent sheets, that can introduce you to design concepts without putting a burden right out of the gate for a young learner or someone new to game design of coding and programming. Then moving on up to ultimately tools that involve programming, tools where you're modding games, and eventually tools like Flash, Java, professional programming languages like C++. Where you would actually get into some of the hardcore coding. For those of you who are interested in this, by the way, we've got some printouts of this slide once you walk right out the door. It's actually broader than just this visual. There's about 50 different game-making tools sort of slotted in at different points in a learning pathway. For those of you who are interested, I'd encourage you to check it out.
One of the things... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was very quickly then. One of my favorite things to do, and it's a big part of my job, is going out and training people to use all of our club tech programs. And one of the best ones to do that I enjoy the most is doing game tech, because we start off with people who, think, well, I can't do this. And we use Scratch, which, if you notice, is kind of in the middle of that graph. So it's a programming language with a lot more of those kinds of skills needed than some of, for example, Kodu, et cetera, although there's programming there, of course, too. And at the end of the 2 or 3 hours that we have together, they'll walk out with a game that they've created and they figured out how to do, because all I do is stand up there and ask questions. Once we give them a little introduction to the program, where things are, I show them how to make the cat run. And then after that, they create their own game, and they walk out with a game that all I do is ask questions the rest of the period. It really is very simple. It looks intimidating. It is not. And I've had people, not just people who are our tech center directors, but I've had like the membership person who greets the kids when they come in at the front desk, whose sole interaction with technology at the club is showing the kids where the card swiper is. They've created games. And so it really is not a difficult thing. It really is very simple.
One of the things that I did want to comment on is that, if you're going to use game design for learning, what you need to understand first and foremost is the motivation that drives your students to play to games. Because at the end of the day, for them, first and foremost, it's about creating play. It's about creating play and about creating something that is fun to do. And a lot of the intention behind creating tools like Kodu that use programming language that we call a situated programming language, which is essentially a programming language that's always tied to play, is precisely that it is the first introduction that kids are going to get into the tools of programming. I have 20-something years of experience doing computer science and computer engineering, both in the game industry, in robotics industry, in automation, and so on and so forth. By and large, the way that those experiences are taught in schools are not fun, are anything but fun. Yeah. In fact, for girls, one of the biggest challenges when I was at Michigan State, and I interviewed a lot of girls about this, is that the way that professors and faculty members talk about computer science to them is literally talking down to girls. It's literally using a discourse and a way of presenting things that is not only demeaning in many ways, but it also completely ignores what motivates somebody, what would motivate a girl, or would motivate somebody who's not a hardcore programmer to actually enter programming, to actually enter computer science. What we're trying to do with something like Kodu is take the regular pathway of here's the tools, go pick up the tools, and then you'll make something, actually topple it on its head and say, we know you like play, we know you like fun. Here are tools to create that fun. And then let's discover what lies under the hood of those things that you like so much.
If I could just piggyback on that for a second, Alex. I mean, I think another interesting thing that goes along with that is if you sort of think about the traditional stereotype of a classroom where you have a teacher in front lecturing and the students are like sponges absorbing knowledge, and then they do some exercises or homework to reinforce that. You know, one of the neat things about getting kids involved in game design is even if they meet that experience in a classroom, it transitions pretty quickly, and instead of that model, you have kids who stop thinking of themselves primarily as students or primarily as learners, even though they are learning, and they immediately think of themselves as designers. And it's even, you know, they recognize they're learning, they recognize they're apprentices, if you will, but they think of themselves as practitioners of an art or practitioners of a craft. And I think that's something really exciting to see happen in a classroom.
I've worked on professionally outside of teaching on a lot of different size teams. So I've worked on, iPhone app teams where it's 3 or 4 people. And I worked at Rockstar Games right out of college for about 3 years, where even at that time we were probably close to 1,000 worldwide, and we're making these, Grand Theft Auto games. So they were huge, huge budget productions. And I've never started with any of the tools up here. I know almost every tool on there. I've designed in almost all of them. But I always start, as I think most game designers do, with markers, construction paper, and scissors. Now, I think everyone, a preschooler, can use those. No teachers are not comfortable with those 3 tools. And you can go a really, really long way towards determining, like you say, the dynamics of play, the mechanics of what makes a game fun, how you win, what's the one little thing of this that we really like and want to focus on. And so we'll do whole workshops, week-long workshops with kids where the laptops are closed the entire time, and we design full, robust games in either using our bodies or using simple materials, and then we go, okay, now we'll talk about how we would apply this in a computer. But I think to be language specific is limiting you, and thinking of it as, okay, we're learning a skill set that is how to program is really not what it's about. It's we're learning about the mechanics of the systems of games, and we're learning about how we break fun down and say, well, this is what fun actually means, and this is how we stimulate fun. This is how we stimulate play.
And I will say, to piggyback on that one of the things that we find that girls in particular realize is that computers are kind of stupid. They're only as smart as what you tell them. And so one of the things that I see over and over is, I'm smarter than a computer. And that's really quite a revelation for some kids. And also, some of these tools, you don't have to have a game necessarily. You can also extend what you're teaching in the classroom as a simulation. And it's, you can do, we're doing a flea simulation where we're learning about multiplying fleas. We're learning we're doing clinical trials at Girlstart this summer where girls are testing drugs and how they work, but they're not, they're creating the whole environment. So there's a lot of things you can do besides just having a game necessarily that will extend what you're teaching in the classroom and also teach game design tools.
Great. Thank you, Julie. We have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure we have time for questions. Do we use this thing here? Or I guess. So if you have a question, also, if you're a teacher teaching game design, you have a little story you want to tell, as the panel does, I'd like to hear that too. So can you toss that around? Thank you. Questions?
Thank you. My name is Jaco van der Sijp. I work for Shell. And one of the wicked problems that we're working with is climate, energy, water, health, food, and preferably all together. Have you got examples of wicked problems that have truly been solved using games? And what was the trick?
I mean, there's one, I think, very famous one that people mention all the time these days, which is Folded at Home, which was a game that was created where there are some very difficult protein folding problems in making very advanced cancer drugs and very advanced genetic treatment, where the computational power required to figure out how these proteins work is massive, is in a way almost more than the computational power that, say, a Google or a Microsoft even has in-house right now. Certainly more than the academics could get devoted to that. So they worked with some game designers to create a game where you basically just model these proteins. It's a puzzle game, but it's the real science of protein folding. And they solved the one that they'd been working on with computers for 25 years in, I think it was a week and a half.
It was weeks, right?
It was weeks, not even months. So I think that's very recent, and that's a new frontier, but I think that was an example of, like you said, computers are stupid. Humans are very not stupid. The stupidest human is an incredibly complicated, very, very powerful machine. And so when we can leverage and kind of crowdsource, but also there's a metaphor there, right? That the game wasn't actual science. It was fun to play. It was challenging. It had leaderboards, but it harnessed that energy and used it for really very positive things and very positive advances. I think we're going to see more of that. And it's maybe didn't solve a problem directly, but it harnessed game design to take human labor and create some really interesting things out of it.
I'll throw out another example really quickly in your field, which is we have some colleagues who you know, many folks are working on games that are environmental science or climate change themed. We had some colleagues who worked on one and did a very exhaustive study of learning outcomes and knowledge that was retained by students who played the game. And the most interesting thing that they found was you could play that game and sort of intentionally try to melt down the planet, and the students who did that actually had the best retention of learning outcomes. And it speaks to another cool thing that games can do, because if we melt down the planet in real life, that's probably not that's certainly not a win condition, and it's probably not recoverable from. But in a game, you can do that, and you can sort of see how all the levers and the sliders work together to lead to that outcome, and that can really, you can understand the boundary conditions as you would say in science. So I think that's another powerful technique.
I'll get you after. I think we had a hand over there. Right, yep. Run. This is being taped, so we want to make sure the questions are. Yeah. Go ahead, Alex. Yeah.
So the system that we are working on.
Can you get close to the microphone?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? Okay. The system that we're working on at Microsoft that we announced last week is called Studio K, and the idea behind Studio K is essentially that when you are creating a game, there's two levels of learning that need to happen every time. The first one is learning the game system, so understanding how to create things like rules and goals and mechanics and so on and so forth. And then the second one is learning from the system, right? So learning what's at the higher level what you wanna express. And so when we're looking at assessment, when we understand games at those levels, we can begin to see, for example, if we give a child a challenge around create a game that depicts an underwater ecosystem, or that creates, or that proposes a solution to some of these grand challenges, we can actually track three aspects that become really visible. First of all, design decisions. So how do they actually step by step try to construct the game? The second one is their language. How do they begin to talk about the game, and not only about the game, but about the subject matter as it translates into the game. And then, of course, what are the tools that they use in those decisions to actually make that happen? And so by triangulating that and by tracking that, we're able to look at things like an area that's very popular right now. It's called computational thinking. In terms of, did you create, for example, if you wanted to create a population of an underwater school of fish, right? How would they behave? And how would you make it into a school? What kind of artificial intelligence are you actually putting in it to actually try to reproduce those elements? So those are the components that are trackable and that are visible. Now, where it's different from traditional assessment is that we don't have a fill in the bubble test. It's not standardized. Rather, it gives a voice to the learner about their own learning in the process of creation.
Yes, sir, right here.
Is this on?
There it is. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Tom Ellman. I teach computer science and media studies at Vassar College. You guys have done a great job of making the case that teaching game design is a good way to get kids interested in learning to become game designers, and also to learn the underlying technologies like computer science, for example. What I'm wondering, though, is do you find that administrators often come back and say, this is great, but what about teaching history and biology and ecology and so forth So I'm wondering if you have any stories about how students, through learning game design, got sufficiently interested in fields like, say, the environmentalism and so forth, that they were actually willing to put in the ordinary work of reading and writing that is still necessary to learn those things.
So Agent Sheets uses if-then statements, which is, essentially you build the story before you create your game. And we work with teachers, and mostly what we're getting from administrators is, please come help us solve this issue that we don't have any qualified teachers, or teachers that don't feel qualified, because every teacher can really teach game design. But so what we're getting is the other question back from administrators saying, we just don't have teachers that feel like they can teach the technology that's changing so quickly. But I've also seen, like we did the oil spill at Girlstart, we did an underwater habitat, so we were talking about, balancing underwater habitats and what that looks like, and then the oil spill happened, so the girls went ahead and put an oil spill in and capped the oil spill, and then it became this bigger conversation. So it's, as far as like what teachers can use with game design, and I can answer to that effect, that you can use game design to talk about, social issues. You can also talk about, bullying in the classroom through game design. I mean, there are a lot of things that you can address as a teacher and still, I think, do in a way that is using, paper and pens and technology and all of that together.
To dovetail onto that just a little bit very quickly, I work with public school teachers in a year-long program through New Visions for Public Schools, where it's 6 technologists and 6 teachers. And we very carefully selected the teachers so that they were not. And so there's like 1 science teacher, one computer science teacher, and the other 4 are not technology teachers at all. And the goal is to bring these games into their classrooms. And there was some hesitation at first, but then it became very clear that, like, well, hey, if you can understand the Civil War as a series of if-then statements, if you can understand our budget crisis right now as a series of if-then statements, you can almost reach a deeper level of scholarship quicker, where you're not just talking about what happened, because I'm a history major in college, I'm a history buff, but you're talking about the why. Right? What were all of the conditions that led to these historic events, not just these historic events were a series of dates and a series of people. And so I think almost game design is more useful in history, is more useful in comparative literature and things like that, even than it is in science and math.
I agree with all of that, but let me take it in a slightly different direction, which is making a game is inherently a multidisciplinary task, whether you have a giant team or whether you're one individual. During its development phase, Gamestar Mechanic was the subject of research on a number of really good PhD dissertations. I'm looking at Alex because you wrote one of them. In one of them, they were both following cohorts of students, and in one of them, there was a young man who was in the cohort, started out, and did some really wonderful imaginative games, and then all of a sudden he dropped out of the program and didn't show up for months. And when he finally returned and the researchers asked, hey man, what was, it's good that you're back, what was going on? This is what he said. He said, I just love this, I love making games, but I have to tell you, when I made my games and my peers would play them, they would laugh at me because his reading and writing skills were below grade level. And so he had wanted to drop out of the program, but instead went and sought extra help with his reading and writing so that he could improve his communication to his players in his games. Went back, did that, got back into the program, got back into game design, and made some of the most wonderful imaginative games to date that we've seen anybody make in Gamestar. So not only does it solve a motivation problem, but it connects many disciplines, and the assessment is built in when your peers, when your players are playing your game. It's got to work effectively and engage them if it's successful as a game.
Okay, we have the last question right over here.
David Moran, and there I am. And I'm an MFA graduate student at the University of Central Florida. And I'm actually really interested, I think what Girlstart is doing is a great initiative, but I'm also wondering about the concept of gender play and gender expression with game design, because you have games for girls, which can almost ghettoize, and make stereotypical what girls are supposed to like. It's not just about Barbie, and then you have games for change, which allow maybe more for gender play, and then games as design where you can actually construct, you know, your worldview as a game designer. And I'm just wondering, you talk about, I think Aubrey, or what was the student that you mentioned?
Audrey.
Yes, that you know, she grew in designing her game, but did you see like her worldview as, you know, identifying, you know, as a woman, or like her gender identity really coming through with the design that she was doing? Because I work with many LGBTQ youth and especially trans youth who often play video games a lot because it's a way for them to just get out of the physical challenges that they're going through because of, you know, a very cisgenderist society that they live in. So I'm just wondering how, you know, you deal with that, because it's important to acknowledge the girl identity, because there are girls that aren't dealing specifically with that issue, but then, you know, there's a spectrum of orientation and gender expression that we have to think about too.
Right, and actually it's becoming less and less, I think, just from what I've observed. As far as at Girlstart, we don't paint robots pink and call it Girlstart. I mean, we approach the way that girls work in groups and collaborate, and girls want to connect what they're doing to a kind of a bigger cause for the good. That's what we find, and men are, you know, boys are the same in a lot of ways. So actually, I'm changing the way I think about gender, and that's something that, as you know, when we did the whole Gamestar mechanic pilot a few summers ago, I was, you know, waiting for girls to tell me that they hated the machine-looking stuff, and I mean, I was doing everything but biting my tongue, saying, "Oh, but you don't like this because it's like you're being in a factory." They loved it, and in fact, the comment they got was, "We want more weapons. We want more things that, you know." And so I've learned a lot about what, you know, we categorize as girls or boys, but what we're finding is what I find is that girls relate to game development in a very different way. It's social, they're talking, they're collaborating, and, you know, it's a co-ed world. So when they get out of Girlstart, they're going to be programming with a lot of boys. So I don't see it as a way to say, you know, this is the way that girls design as much as this is how we can work to develop better games. But I'd love to continue this conversation with you as well, because there's a lot of, I think, gender issues that we place on people based on kind of what we, back in, you know, in our old thinking.
And one of the other things too, I think that's where game design is so important in some of these areas, because when you play a game, you are playing somebody else's expectations of what you would like. When you create a game, it's an expression of who you are, an expression of the things that you like, the expressions of the way you see yourself in the world. And so you can be a girl and produce a game that the rest of society would say, well, that's not what girls are interested in. But that's okay, because that's who you are. And same thing with LGBT youth. You know, this expresses who I am through the game that I am creating, and I am showing the world what is important to me.
And Alex, we'll finish with you, okay?
Yeah, and it's also worthwhile to educate oneself in the history of games, and some of the most powerful, you know, impacting examples of games were actually created by LGBT people. Danny Buntenberry is somebody that I would totally recommend anybody who's interested in that field, understanding eventually her work, who became a transgender. She was the creator of 7 Cities of Gold and of Mule, and of some of the most early examples of multiplayer games, what eventually became multiplayer computer games. So there is a history of this, and it's always helpful, in my mind, for those youth to understand that, one, it's never been that clean cut, and two, it's really about the work. It's about the expression. It's about the message that we're trying to communicate at the end of the day.